The Power Moms Network, empowering moms to lift the world.
Welcome. I'm Riley Karsh.
I'm Tova Kopan.
We are thrilled to bring you the We Go Boldly podcast.
Let's talk big burning questions, life changes, and maybe a bit of personal business.
Let's be bold and brave together. Are you ready?
I am. Here comes the show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to We Go Boldly, the podcast, where we are thrilled to be a part of the Power Moms Network. At Power Moms Network, we are empowering moms and creating a community of mothers, mentoring other moms to greatness. As I say every week, please check it out. It's a great community you can join. There are many ways to get involved, and it's a cool place to be. I don't think you have to be a mom to join. You just have to love moms. So check it out and let us know if you join us over there. It is still season 11. I have to take the word still out of my vocabulary, I think, because every time I say it, it sounds negative to me, but I don't mean it that way. I mean it like, hey, we're in season 11, everybody. We are talking today about emotional intelligence and triggers. And triggers is a word that triggers me. No pun intended. So it's going to be an interesting conversation, I think, as we get into a little bit of the science and a little bit of the pop culture of it all. But before I do that, let me say hello to Tova. Welcome her to the show. My lovely co-host. How are you today? What's going on, Tova?
Well, it's a beautiful day in December, except it's September where we are.
It is indeed.
No, it's what can I say? I don't know. These days confuse me. These September, December days that we're experiencing as we record. It's a good day. I am working very hard to be able to take a half day today. Today, I had planned to take the day off. I planned to be traveling to North Carolina as we speak to attend my cousin's wedding. Then I realized about a week into school that was a foolishly optimistic notion that I would be able to pull that off. And instead I said, you know what, though, I'm going to take the day. I'm going to take the day off anyway. And then I was like, what if I took a half day? And now I'm like 1 o'clock, a hard stop at 1 o'clock.
Right. It's dwindling.
Yeah, but it's 1 o'clock, darn it. And I will say I'm actually really looking forward to not being pulled in two directions, or maybe more accurately, like not being pulled in 19 directions, like when my kids are home from school, like right. Not having my laptop out. So that's what I'm focusing on. Like, even though my half day is, kind of not really a half day, and I'm just going to like run to the gym basically as fast as I can. And I actually won't have time to change before I pick up and whatever, like, it doesn't matter. I won't be, I won't be split between my computer and them until, yeah. And a lot of times especially recently when I've been working a lot, I have done a really poor job of like setting the boundary of turning off my computer at any reasonable time. And so I'm like, okay, well, this will be nice. This will be a nice little switcheroo here. So, I'm gonna take it for what it's worth. It's a lovely, beautiful fall day. And I'm wearing a flannel shirt that is very warm right now, but I'm trying to manifest some like fall weather.
Yeah, I was gonna say that we both are. Clearly, I'm in like my pumpkin spice sweater. It's not cold enough for this sweater right now, but I refuse. I was like, I'm not, whatever. I'm gonna live the life I want to live. Come at me, weather.
And I do just want to say, I know that you have said repeatedly, the 11th season still, but it has been a heavy lift of the season.
Yeah.
And this is, I feel like it's almost all been leading up to this episode in sort of a way. Excuse me. And this is a big episode. This is a hard episode. And so much of all of the other episodes are sort of like, this is what happens to your body when it's responding to an emotional trigger or both in the official term, the official, I know you're going to tell us a lot more about what I'm saying, but like the official definition of emotional trigger, and then the more of what a lot of people think of. And then as we turn the corner into next week, we're going to be talking a little bit about how to start shed. Like we've been talking all season about how to shed some of this, but I feel like it's going to be stepping into some new light as we look towards the new year. And I'm excited about that.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. I agree. It is kind of the turning point of the season.
yeah. So with that, I would love to hear some definitions.
My favorite. So just to recap, as you all know, excuse me, we're full of coughs today. As you all know, season 11 is really about looking back and evaluating what parts of your life, not that you want to like forget ever happened or like take away or wish away, but looking back at all the parts of your life as a whole and seeing how they're impacting what is working for you today, what isn't working for you today, what you would like to have in your life. And I don't mean like cars and houses, maybe you want those things, but like where you want yourself to be today, 5 years from today, 10 years from today. And the whole kind of goal of the season is to help you gain that self awareness that allows you to see what's causing the behaviors, what's causing the beliefs that are and are not working for you right now. So today we're talking about kind of the crux of that, which is emotional intelligence. And we're talking about emotional triggers. And I have like weirdly strong feelings about the word triggers for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is gun violence. But which we were just talking about as well before the show, so it's on my mind. But even every time I hear the word, I'm like, oh, that's a bad word for this. Um, so let's talk about what emotional intelligence is first, because that's, I think, the easier side of this coin. And definitionally, emotional intelligence refers to the ability to identify and manage one's own emotions as well as the emotions of others. And I want to clarify that because I don't like the end of that definition, only because it indicates that you are in charge of other people's emotions. You are not. What it really means is managing how you react to other people's emotions, not how other people emote. It's a really important distinction, and it'll carry through the whole conversation. So generally speaking, when you read the research on emotional intelligence, there are certain components that make up emotional intelligence. Those are self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. Um, you know, when we talk about that, it's really like your ability to identify and name your emotions. I am currently feeling sad, happy, frustrated, angry, furious, whatever it is. The ability to know what the emotion is that you're feeling, which, let's be clear, I'm pretty self-aware, and there are times when I have no idea what emotion I'm feeling, or maybe I'm feeling like 25 at once and it's hard to distinguish between them. And then it goes on to reference, your ability to take those emotions, put them to use. So to problem solve, to think deeply about something, to have empathy for other people. And then helping other people regulate their emotions, which really comes into play as a parent, obviously, or if you're parenting up, it also comes into play. Or if you work in an environment where people are emotionally dysregulated, which I certainly did at a time, and being able to help those people sort of regulate helps you. But again, we are not responsible for other people's feelings and emotions. So why are we talking about emotional intelligence? Obviously, I just mentioned self-awareness as like a key component to what we're talking about all season long. And so emotional intelligence, obviously, of course, follows along with that and is also a key component. Um, but also we're talking about emotional triggers today. And so in order to manage whatever emotional triggers you have, you need to have some level of emotional intelligence. And the more you grow and build your emotional intelligence, the more you'll be able to manage your triggers. So excuse me. So that's emotional intelligence. When we're talking about emotional triggers, we are talking about survival responses. Um, when something happens in our lives, and we talked about this in our episodes on trauma, and multiple other episodes as well that I'm blanking on right now, but I know we did. But when we talk about a survival response, we're talking about something has happened in your life that your brain now has associated to something else. And when you feel that something else, or you sense that something else, your brain goes back into that survival mode, that fight or flight, freeze, um, all the other aspects that they've now established exist. So emotional triggers are really a much deeper thing than being like what we see on social media or in pop culture, where somebody is like, Target ran out of the Hydro Flask bottles that I wanted. I'm so triggered. No, you're not, right? Like that's not that's not what it means. And so that appropriation by pop culture, I think, waters down the real meaning of what it is to be triggered and to have an emotional trigger. So let's talk a little more definitions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Tova because I'm doing a lot of talking. So emotional triggers in the psychological definition world is any external stimulus like a person, situation, or event that evokes a strong emotional reaction, most often tied to past experiences or deep unresolved feelings. So they're often called mental health triggers or psychological triggers. They could be a memory, it could be an object, it could be a person, something sensory often triggers us. And the emotions that they evoke are generally speaking very negative, or it causes you to relive a traumatic experience. So essentially what they're saying is that something non-threatening becomes threatening, right? Like, yeah, maybe it's the smell of cigar smoke triggers you to remember a really bad experience you had with somebody who smoked cigars, right? But that person isn't there at the moment, and then you're going into a full-blown panic attack, even though the event that you're reliving has ended and you're not there anymore, and that's not happening. Your body doesn't know that. And so your body reacts as if it's still in that scenario that it's reliving. So that's really where we're starting from. There are other things, and Tova, you and I have talked about this, that are triggers in the sense that, maybe you have a whole lot of emotional baggage around somebody and they ask you something and you're like, it's a pretty innocuous question, and yet your response to that question is disproportionate. And it's disproportionate because it's carrying the weight of the years of baggage associated with that person. I think that that's a little different than an emotional trigger, but it is a relevant part of this conversation because it does weigh you down. It sits in that backpack we keep talking about, and it's not good for us, right? Like it doesn't help us in any way.
Yeah, and I think it has more to do with like the self-awareness aspect of your emotional intelligence. And I think it's a really important part. I mean, hopefully a lot of people listening to this aren't carrying a lot of emotional triggers. Like I know we talk a lot about trauma and recognizing that trauma for everybody doesn't have to be these massive quote traumatic events that one, being trapped in a fire or sexual abuse. Like ideally, most people haven't experienced those. What we know is the fact is most people have experienced something traumatic in their lives. But
Right.
And we also know that trauma can be something in one person's life that another person wouldn't consider to be a big deal, but for them, the way that they experienced it truly did result in something in a traumatic experience. Um, and and so that can become a emotional trigger. And I think, as you were describing it, I do, like to think about it as being a what does it say? I had it right in front of me. Oh, personal alarm system.
Yeah.
Right. And, I one of my, and I think one of the more popular shows on the West Wing, and admittedly, I'm rewatching the West Wing, but is an episode where one of the main characters, Josh Lyman, is dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. I mean, obviously, this is a very traditional definition of like an emotional trigger. And, he is lashing out at people. He is very angry. His body is on hyper alert. And he's talking to a therapist. I think he's a psychologist. I don't remember. But he's talking to a therapist, and the therapist has basically diagnosed him immediately. And also, like, almost immediately knows what the issue is, but he has to like get Josh there. And also, it would be a silly show if it was 6 minutes long.
Right.
And essentially, what has happened is like 8 months, 9 months earlier, he had been shot, and he had sort of dealt with it pretty well. But they were bringing it back to show that he hadn't really dealt with it well. And they brought it back. And it turned out that it was the music, the holiday music, the Christmas music, specifically the sounds of the trumpets and the brass, that his mind had equated that to the sirens. And the sirens were connecting it to his shooting. And so it had raised the level in his body, right? Everything was on this hyper alert. So he's yelling at the president in the Oval Office, and he said, and I thought this was really interesting. He said to his therapist, like, well, will this happen forever? Like, well, every time I hear like a brass band, am I going to go into the spiral? And he said, no. And the guy said, well, why? And he said, because we heal. Like, and obviously we heal by going to therapy, and he was in therapy and he identified his trigger. But, you mentioned the cigar smoke. You don't have to, for the rest of your life, have cigar smoke be a trigger. But had Josh not had friends say, hey, something is up with him, because he didn't identify it. He was just frustrated. He was just angry, right? He was so annoyed that people were being dumb around him. And it was the friends around him that said his personality has changed, his behavior has changed, his responses aren't proportional, something is off. And they were the one that got him help. And had he not gotten help, maybe every time he saw that, he heard brass music for a long time, he would have had heightened responses. So I'm circling back, a very long story, great episode, totally should watch it, best show, to this concept of self-awareness and emotion, being able to regulate your emotions. But I think the very first step to this, and the very first step to understanding, as you described, maybe not exactly what emotional trigger is, but understanding the baggage you're carrying when you're responding to things around you. So, knowing that if you have a perfect stranger asking you a question, and then somebody you know for 20 years asking you a question, and if you have a difficult relationship with that person, the way you answer the question with that person versus the stranger may be very different.
Yeah.
Just because you're bringing so much more. I mean, baggage is a thing. It's the reason we call it baggage. It's like you're showing up to every conversation with like a backpack and a duffel and like
right. The whole history
suitcase
of that relationship comes along with it. Yeah.
Self-awareness is, I think, and bringing that emotional intelligence is so important, because if you know that you're bringing that to the conversation, either it can help you maybe leave some of it at the door and say, all right, when I walk in here, I'm going to leave as much of it as the door as I can. Or it's like, yeah, I can't answer this question. Like I can't even answer this question.
Right. I do want to say, if you have experienced, sort of more severe trauma, if you grew up in a violent household, for instance, and one of your current triggers is loud noises, right? Like a door banging or somebody dropping something makes you jump and sends you into that sort of panic mode. That may not go away, right? Like that may be coded into your being. However, the self-awareness to recognize what's happening can help you manage the feelings that come after the jump, right? Like you may always jump at loud noises. You don't have to then spiral out, right? Like you can find tools and techniques, and we'll talk a little bit about that today, although it's very repetitive of what we've already told you guys to do. So those things can help you manage your reactions and manage your stress responses. And I think it's really important to know that it's okay if those things are triggers for you, that you can't get rid of them. Like I get anxious in a car when somebody else is driving. I don't know, I can't make it stop. Like it's not going to stop. I can, however, acknowledge it, say it aloud, talk to the driver about it, typically my husband, and say, yeah, I'm feeling super anxious. I'm sorry I'm jumping. It's weird. I don't like it either. Like I'm trying not to do it, but I can't physically stop myself. So, like help me deal with it, and then I can move forward and deal with it, right? But trying to pretend like it's not happening helps nobody, right? So
I also think it's helpful when you read about some of these things and some of your responses when you've been through something, especially when it's been significant trauma in your life. You may be startled by loud noises, even if loud noises wasn't part of your previous trauma.
right.
Like it is really helpful to learn. This is where learning about things can come in handy because, yeah, I think about you have young kids and there's noises all the time. And they're often startling, right? Because like it can be quiet and then it can be loud and then it's quiet and then they're throwing something and then it's like it's a cartoon and then something's loud and then someone throws a toy and then the toys are loud. And fortunately, as they get older, the toys get quieter, but the kids get louder. In a weird like
true
thing. There's a Venn diagram where they're all loud, like the kids and the toys. But you don't, because you've lived a life before where you may have been able to have quiet and you didn't know that you were seeking quiet. You didn't even know it. You just sought quiet. You didn't know you were seeking quiet because of past trauma. You may not have even acknowledged your past trauma. And now you're in a world where there's constant noise and you love your kids and you love spending time with them, your kids, and you cannot figure out why you are always on edge and always tired. And listen, you don't have to have a previous trauma to be on edge around your kids because they make noise all the freaking time. So I don't want to pretend that that's just a thing that's related to parents who have been through trauma, but it can be heightened if you have been, like, it can be worse if you've been, through something where you're also bringing in where your body is having a reaction to the sound. And what does that mean? Well, it can be really helpful to just be aware of, oh, I don't hate my kids. I am literally having a physical reaction to this noise. What could help? Noise canceling headphones. That can help. Like, I'm not ignoring my kids when I'm doing the dishes. I am actually listening to some peaceful music or a podcast, and I am giving myself some peace from the noise. I am, taking a time out or like whatever it might be, you can find what it is, but having self-awareness, to know, for me at least, is I like knowledge, and having knowledge is very empowering in situations like this.
Yeah, having knowledge and being able to name things allows us to deal with them in a more sort of forward-facing way. We have to take a break, but I just want to note some of this research I read. I found sort of fascinating in talking about what you were just talking about, and that's that researchers really don't know how or why the brain forms these triggers. Because it is in your brain. You're not making it up. It's like physically in there. And what they found is that the brain encodes traumatic memories differently than it encodes other memories. And so what they've said is it keeps them up, those events that are traumatic for us live outside of conscious memory, but our brain and body keeps a record, is how they put it, of whatever the threatening experience was. So as you're saying, it may be coded in your brain to a like your example, to music that was playing in the background, or to a particular smell. Oftentimes the stuff is sensory, right? Because senses I mean, we all have had that experience before, whether it's a good memory or a bad memory. Like you smell something like, and you remember your grandma, or you remember baking cookies with your mom in the kitchen, right? Like there's senses that trigger memories for us. And it's no different, I guess, in this kind of instance. And so, as I said before, your brain connects that event and that trigger that it has put with the event to your fight or flight response. And so when it's quote triggered, you react as if you're under threat, as if you're still being attacked or whatever is happening. And it's very similar to PTSD, if not in many cases, it is actually PTSD.
Right.
So let's take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk a little bit about, and you already touched on a bunch of this, but let's talk about it in more depth about how you recognize your triggers. Like, how do you even, okay, I'm self-aware. What am I doing? But we're going to take a quick break first. So we will be right back after this, everyone. Well, hello there, ladies. Are you ready to elevate your life and connect with like-minded souls? Join us every week at the Go Boldly Together weekly Women's Circle, where strength meets sisterhood. Dive into empowering discussions, share your victories, and navigate challenges together. Our circle is a safe space for growth and inspiration. Experience the power of collective wisdom and unleash your full potential. Don't miss out on the transformative energy. Click the link in our show notes or visit us at goboldlyinitiative.com/women's weekly group to learn more about our Go Boldly Circle today. Together, let's embrace the journey of personal development and let's celebrate that unstoppable force within each of us. Okay, so welcome back to the show. Before the break, I mentioned talking a little bit more in depth, and I don't really have it in the outline, so sorry, about what you can do to start recognizing the triggers. And you talked about physical reactions, and I think that is the biggest precursor or cursor. I don't know what that even means. It's the biggest, sign, red flag that something is going on. If you're having a physical reaction, right? And it could be sweaty palms. It could be, feeling really nauseous. It could be dizziness. It could be heart racing, heart palpitations, a shallow breathing all of a sudden. You can't get a deep breath in. And they can be signs of other things too, obviously. But I think if there's something going on and suddenly out of the blue, you're having these physical reactions, it's a pretty good sign that, you've been triggered, right? Like that something is reminding you of something frightening for you or that feels unsafe. And I want to talk a little bit more about that as well, because unsafe doesn't have to mean life-threatening. It's not the same, like it can, right? Like maybe you had a life-threatening experience and now you have some triggers related to that, but it could also mean emotionally unsafe. And that's not something I think people talk about as much, but I think those are more common. And I think it's more often where we get a little muddy in the idea of what's actually a trigger and what's not, right? Because when we're talking about feeling emotionally unsafe, we're talking about things like rejection, betrayal, right? Feeling like the world isn't just, which it's not. But when when it's in your face, right? And it triggers you to think about other times where you just like things didn't go your way and it was wildly unfair. There's a whole list here of common emotional triggers, but they're not like every time you feel rejected, you're not going to be triggered. If you spent, time being rejected and it made you feel emotionally unsafe and you haven't worked through that, then maybe another rejection will cause you to feel this triggering effect, right? And maybe you'll have physical responses, maybe you'll act out, maybe you'll lash out. Who, everybody's different in the way they deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think like if you have been in the example I could give is if you've been in a very bad relationship with somebody, right? Abusive or unsafe, either emotionally or physically with somebody, and you end up being in, you get out of that relationship, but then you end up having a coworker or a manager or somebody who has some of the same characteristics as that person. They're not unsafe, maybe not even emotionally unsafe. They're not physically unsafe at all, but there's something about them that is the same. Maybe they undercut you. Maybe that's not even that. Maybe they just tell jokes the same way. Or maybe there's just something about them that has a quality to the person. Or there's something in your relationship dynamic. Maybe it's something in your relationship dynamic that's similar to the beginning of your relationship with the abuser, that was a good part of your relationship, but it feels too familiar. That could be a trigger. And that may not result in the sweaty palms, but it may result in like a stomach ache every time you're at work. Like, it could result in a physical feeling of like, I think of it as like unrest.
Yeah. Or
like
dread, right?
or
Like
dread.
that feeling of like, I just don't want to be around them.
Almost a physical dread.
Yeah.
And it may take a while for you to figure out, because it's like, why am I judging this person? Like, they've not done anything wrong. I can't figure this out. And then, it may take a while. And then you're like, oh, I have connected to them to this person, and maybe rightfully so in the end. Who knows?
Right.
Not that you would be in an intimate enough relationship to allow abuse to happen, not that you allowed abuse to happen, but an intimate relationship enough that abuse could take place.
Right.
But maybe that is just, who knows? But yeah, I think that can happen. I also think that our conscious part of our brains keep us safe a lot. And as you said, these traumatic events, because of that, get put in this not conscious part. They like get put off to the side. And so what can sometimes happen is, the conscious part of your brain is like, you're good. Things are good. You're safe. You've got out of that situation or whatever the case might be. And then something happens, whether it's a smell or even an incident. Maybe you're confronting this person or this experience that happened before, but you feel like, no, I'm good. I'm safe. And your body starts issuing like warning signs, like the sweaty palms and everything. And you're like, huh, my brain is telling me I'm safe. My brain is saying everything's fine. I should feel like everything's fine, but my body is losing its mind.
Yeah.
And maybe I should be listening to this, like at least figuring out like what it's trying to tell me, because it's not doing this for no reason.
Right. Well, and as we said earlier, it's like an early warning signal.
Yeah.
It's like it's an alarm service for your conscious brain. And
we have talked, many moons ago, and like Michelle Obama talks about in her, I think, The Light We Carry book, about how our brains, and they try to keep us safe sometimes from things that we don't have to be afraid of, right? So that might be not taking a risk, not trying a new job, not jumping outside our comfort zone. So cigar smoke is, I mean, it is actually always dangerous for you, but in this
kind, I know, I was struggling with that one. I was like, wait, no, but it's always bad.
It's always bad for you, but like in the like dangerous immediacy, dangerous.
Yeah.
You're not going to get lung cancer instantaneously.
Correct.
But like, a cologne is not going to immediately be dangerous for you. But all of that being said, your body may know something, and it's worth listening and going, is my body having this reaction because it hasn't figured out yet that I'm safe? And I just need to continue the healing process. Or is my body having this reaction because my brain is covering up something it doesn't want me to know? And my body knows more than my brain.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
sometimes that doesn't always happen, but sometimes that is the case. Sometimes your body is warning you
and it's right.
and it's right. And
Yeah. And as women, right? Like we all have had I mean, I don't want to say speak for all women, but all the women I know have had an experience where we've been in a situation and our body has gone red flag, get out, like get away. And it's been right. And so we are trained not to listen to that by society because we're supposed to be pleasant and nice and fun and whatever all the time.
Yeah.
But it's, as you just said, Tova, it's worth listening to those signals and having a conversation with yourself to
Yeah.
understand what's happening.
Yeah. And it's okay to say, okay, hon, thank you. I mean, for years after I left my marriage, and honestly, I probably should do it again. One of my affirmations was something along the lines of like, thank you. It's okay. Like, you've done it. We're okay. Like,
Right.
to my body,
Yeah.
because it carried so much and it like protected me for so long. So I think that you listen to it and then you have to figure it out. But just like everything we've talked about this season, the first step might be admitting that you're carrying a backpack or a bucket. Like the
Right.
first, the first step is admitting that you're carrying a backpack.
Yeah.
And the second step is to figuring out what's inside the backpack and recognizing that a lot of what's in there is helping you, but that you still don't have to carry it all the time. Like everything we've talked about this season has helped us in some way.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean we have to carry it with us anymore. And
Right.
it doesn't mean we have to like ruminate over it. And it doesn't mean we have to allow it to be in charge.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's just run through this list of sort of common triggers to feeling emotionally unsafe.
Okay.
So I talked about a few of them: rejection, betrayal, unjust treatment. A couple other things that science has shown us, psychology has shown us, often cause people to feel emotionally unsafe, to have that response, are things like um, strongly challenged beliefs, helplessness, loss of control, being excluded or ignored. I mean, imagine if you've grown up where, you were bullied or something in
I was going to say,
school.
just imagine you went to middle school.
Right. Yeah. Well, we have middle schoolers. We know what's happening. But imagine, you're bullied in school and you think you've gotten over it and you like maybe you even went to therapy and you worked through it and all those things. And then somebody, some mean moms don't include you in their mom clique. And, suddenly everything is a much bigger response than it makes sense to be, right? Or
Yeah.
you are like lashing out or things like that. That's a sign that, something's going on and you might want to might want to address it. Um, Disapproval, criticism, feeling unwanted or unneeded. And I think this next one is super important: feeling smothered or too needed. That's a tough one because as parents, I know not all of you are parents, but if you are a parent, you know that you are like too needed 99% of the time. And if that's a trigger for you, and it is for me, just to be clear, you have to work through it because it's really hard on you. Otherwise, like that's not fun to sit with all the time. Insecurity and loss of independence are also potential common emotional triggers for people. So that's just a like discrete list, but there's anything can be quote triggering for people. It really depends on your lived experience and like we said before, noticing patterns in your emotional responses. Do I always react in this way that doesn't feel like rational necessarily. Not that you always have to be rational, but that just really doesn't feel like it makes sense to the stimuli, then start looking at that, thinking about your past experiences. What might be shaping these things happening? And then, like we said, paying attention to your physical responses to stuff.
Well, I also, just as a side note, and I know that, by the time this episode drops, hopefully we know who won the election. I guess I'm hoping, because I hope we like who won the election.
Yeah.
But, at this point, I'm seeing all of these emotional triggers, and they are how candidates can exploit people. I mean, and you look at how really horrible people have taken over countries in the past, and it is by exploiting these feelings in people. Just, as a side note, that's where my brain is apparently going.
Well, if you're feeling emotionally unsafe, it makes you easier to manipulate, right?
Yeah.
And if you're feeling physically unsafe, again, it makes you easier to manipulate and get you to do whatever it is that will allow you to feel safe. Your brain and your body want safety, right? That's a biological imperative. You want to survive. And so if we have tricked ourselves into thinking that we are unsafe and the only way to get safe is to listen to, so and so, then yeah, we're being manipulated.
Well, and under no circumstance will I ever blame a victim of abuse, ever.
No.
Because I do not think it's someone's fault. I do think that building your own emotional intelligence helps with your own personal resilience, and understanding where your feelings can come from help, and just talking about them and being open with yourself and others about them help you be just, I don't want to say less susceptible, because I still don't think that's true. I think you can totally be exploited in every way by the right person, because you want to be vulnerable with the people, and that's how people get in. But I think that the more aware you are, the harder it is for somebody to be able to exploit your vulnerabilities. Like the more you're aware. So it's not impossible, because people are bad, and that's how they abuse you, because they are the bad ones, not because you've done something wrong.
Right.
But I think the more aware you are of your own, like just of your own, these aren't emotional weaknesses. These are just of who you are, and the things, how you are, and the experiences that you've had and how they affect who you are. That's why it's called emotional intelligence. Like, the smarter you are about your own emotions and where they come from, and the more aware you are, the more resilient you are, the more you understand why you react certain ways in certain situations. And I think our vulnerabilities are often our greatest strengths. It's what we can bring to situations. And so the more we understand this, the more that we can bring these strengths to situations. So that was a turn that I wasn't expecting to take, but I think it is really important that there is so much value and benefit to learning this about ourselves, beyond just the unbecoming side, but also just stepping into who you are.
Yeah.
It's so important to learn this about ourselves.
It is. We need to take another quick break. So we'll do that when we come back. I don't like this part of the outline, but we're going to talk about it anyway. And we're going to talk about how we are responsible for ourselves. We're responsible for our reactions, our feelings, the way we act, and the way we react. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we will get into all of that fun stuff. So we'll be right back, everyone.
Hey, pod friends, it's us again. Looking for a place to collaborate, an opportunity to share your knowledge? Have you been working so hard on a podcast, book, course, product, or retreat? Do you have insights that could light up our podcast? Well, we want to hear from you. We would love to support you in all that you are and do. Join us at Go Boldly Initiative, where we celebrate diverse perspectives and share the wisdom of our incredible community. Whether you're an expert, a hobbyist, or simply love learning, we invite you to reach out with your ideas. Visit our website at goboldlyinitiative.com/podcast guests to pitch the show or shoot us an email at hello@goboldlyinitiative.com to talk all things collaboration, advertising, and affiliation opportunities. Become part of our growing family. Let's make learning an adventure together.
Okay, welcome back to the show. So before the break, I mentioned we're going to talk about something that I'm not particularly excited to talk about. And I don't know why, because I actually believe this very deeply, but I don't enjoy having this conversation with other people because most people seem to get defensive about this. But we're going to do it anyway because it's important. So the concept of being emotionally triggered, we've sort of walked through what that looks and feels like. Now, what Tova just said before the break is extremely important to remember. Victims are not responsible for the thing that happened to them, right? So whatever was done to you, you are not responsible for that. You are, however, responsible for how you behave, the reactions you give to other people, the way you are in the world. That is your responsibility. And I'm not suggesting it's easy because it's not. And if something bad has happened to you, it's easy to be like, well, it's not my fault and not feel, it's easier to not take responsibility because something bad has happened to you and you're dealing with it.
I would use the caveat of, as we have this conversation, I'm just going to say, once you're out of the abusive relationship.
Yes. Yeah. That's a great caveat.
Let's just, like, we are not passing judgment on somebody making decisions to stay safe.
No, exactly. And that's why this conversation is so hard.
So we are, you need to take the time and go to therapy to hopefully go through the process you need to forgive yourself for decisions that you made when you were in these, and I say abusive relationships, but anything that was causing you trauma that maybe made decisions that you would never make under any other circumstances.
Right.
So whenever you get out of that situation, and it could be anything, it could be a fire, not to go back to poor Josh Lyman on the West Wing, but he carried immense guilt with him because when he was home and his older sister was babysitting him and there was a fire in their house, he ran out of the house and his older sister died in the fire.
Yeah.
And the therapist was like, you were a little kid and she was it was not your job to save her. Like that is, you forgive yourselves what happens during a trauma. That is something separate. So we are talking about when you are past the trauma, not past it emotionally, clearly, but when you are out of the abusive relationship. I just wanted to make that caveat because I think it's really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. When you are in a safe environment, right?
Yes.
Like a space that is safe for you to be whoever you are. It is important to recognize that you're in charge of your feelings. If you have an emotional trigger and you react however you react, all of that is okay. It's normal. It happens to pretty much everybody. You have a choice though, right? If you want to continue that sort of reactive way of existing, or if you want to, what we said earlier, maybe you're always going to jump when there's a loud noise or if a glass breaks, or if, you're always going to get that like pull in constriction if you smell a cigarette, right? It's the next step after that I'm talking about, because there are physical reactions we can't control, right? Like I can't help that my palms sweat when I get a shot. Like I cannot stop that. It's never going to stop. I can, however, do some deep breathing, talk myself through it, let the technician know, hey, I'm really scared of this. This makes me very stressed, anxious. There's a lot of reasons. Can you just keep talking to me? I am in charge of that next step after the sort of uncontrollable response. So It's a really nuanced kind of thing, and it's hard to, especially when you're sort of new to it, to accept that you have control over any of that. Um, and control is maybe not the right word, because like
I think
it's not like you can get it in a death grip or something. It's more like you can choose to use some tools to help you through it.
I think you have decision-making power, right?
Yeah.
So, and you have awareness. So like going back to the example of you're sensitive to loud noises and you live with toddlers,
Right.
like you know that their noises, and to use trigger in the truest sense of the word, are going to trigger a high stress response in your body. It is going to leave you irritable on top of all the normal stuff that makes any human being irritable, like daycare being expensive and running
Right.
back from work and being stressed, like all the normal stressors. Now your body is going to have a stress response. You know that's going to happen. You were an adult person who is self-aware emotionally, and it is on you to figure out a way to put steps in place to help handle that physical stress response. That is on you. It's not
Yeah.
your toddler's fault, right? It's not your partner's fault. Um, now your partner, if you bring them into the circle of trust, can be there to help. If they know that, should be there to help to know that. That's the whole point, hopefully, of having a partner, I've been told. But like, you can, but it's still on you to say, hey, like, I don't need to respond in irritation and anger towards my 3-year-old and be like, well, I had a rough life, man. I don't
Right.
know what to tell you. Like, that's how you break the cycle. That's how you stop passing it on to your kids.
Yeah, so that's such an important point that you just made, Tova. And it is, if it helps you to think of it that way, I mean, because that's the truth, right? Like it's not like you're making it up. If it helps you to think about you're stopping a cycle of some kind,
Yeah.
right? Like that might give you more motivation to take these next steps of what it is that you can do to stop the impulse that happens after you've been triggered. I I think there are things where you can like work through and you're no longer triggered and you won't jump or you won't
Sure.
get that clenched feeling. You know, I think that's great and that's a great goal to have. But I think for real, like for extensive trauma, I think it's much harder to get to that place. It's is easier, however, to get to the place where you can go, okay, I'm having the reaction. Here's the steps I'm going to take to help myself work through it instead of like lashing out, behaving impulsively, making more decisions that aren't helpful to you, that kind of thing, or blaming other people
Well,
when they don't have anything to do with it, really.
and I think it's a both and,
Yeah.
right? Like, you do both things, because if you can, depending on the physical or emotional response or physical response, like you may benefit from lessening the physical response. It may give you more time to kind of step in. I also think it's helpful. Uh, no one should be seeking perfection here,
Right.
right? And if you have been making great strides and then you do snap at your toddler, like they'll get over it. Like you hug them, you love them, you show up every day. Like
Yeah.
they get it. They don't care. They're fine. Even parents without trauma snap at their kids. Like it's fine.
Yeah.
So I think, I also think it's really important to share with your kids. Like, you don't have to share, like, hey, mommy had a really hard childhood and that's why I'm snapping at you. But
Right.
you can say, like, I'm extra sensitive to noise. I'm not asking you to not play with your noisy toys because they're really cool and you're 3. I'm asking you to play with them in your room.
Right.
Like, and they're 3, so they're only going to do that like 30% of the time, but like if you're lucky. But you can say that, and you can also set the expectation in your home. I try to set semi successfully that perfection is not the goal. Like, I am trying to do a better job of taking deep breaths when I get frustrated with your loud noises. But this is a deal with us. This is a partnership. I need you to try to keep your fire truck in your bedroom.
Right.
And I'll do a better job when you forget to take deep breaths.
Yeah. Well,
Like,
and it's about modeling, right? And it doesn't
Yeah.
have to just be in a parent-child scenario. It could be in a romantic relationship. It could be in friendships. It could be at
Yeah.
work. You can model this behavior to your bosses, right? Like you can be like, you know what, I need 5 minutes to gather my thoughts, and I will get right back to you, right? If you're like overloaded, overwhelmed at work, and your boss is like yelling for things, you don't have, I mean, you know what you can say that is appropriate in that environment, but you can take the 5 minutes to take a deep breath. And maybe it's not even 5 minutes really. To
Right.
take a step back instead of allowing that person or situation to trigger you and send you down a path that's much harder to come back from. Um, I think you've talked about this a little bit earlier, but a big component of all of this is forgiveness, right? And we have an episode on this. We talked about it before, but really, I think it's essential to your own mental well-being and physical well-being that you work on the forgiveness of yourself, right? Like you forgive yourself for having these kinds of reactions. Not that there's anything to forgive, but like a lot of us feel like there is.
Right.
As you said, Toba, you forgive yourself for decisions you made at a time when that was the best decision you could make, right? Like you
Yep.
couldn't do anything else. And so forgiving yourself and letting those things go will help you also with the flip side of this, which is managing your emotional reactions to things.
Yep.
Um, we've talked a lot about techniques throughout the season, and this is really repetitive of all of that, but it's repetitive for a reason. These things work. They're shown time and time again, both through like studies, science, and our own lived experience that these things really do work and will help you if you try them. The first, of course, being therapy. Particularly cognitive behavioral therapy and positive psychology can help you sort of work through a lot of this stuff and have somebody on your team, right? Like
Yep.
an objective person who is on your team who's there to help you through whatever it is you need to get through. Um,
I heard and just in case, BetterHelp wants to let us be their podcast folks. I heard the best BetterHelp ad, which was with the Pod Save America guys. And one of the guys was like, people say, oh, I read for my therapy or I cook for my therapy. And he was like, I go to therapy for my therapy.
yeah. Yeah.
I was like, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think it's therapy is so good for us. I just, with the right therapist, let me be clear. If you have the wrong therapist for you, it is not great for you.
And that is a great reminder that like if you have the wrong meditation app or the wrong meditations, which may be the next thing you're saying,
Yeah,
or the wrong
fine.
mindfulness technique, try a different one. If you have the wrong therapist, try a different one. Like these only work if they're working for you. And so, yes, therapy has been proven to be effective. Specific types of therapy have been proven to be effective. Mindfulness there, like meditation has been proven. Well, they only work if you do them. And you're only going to do them if they're a good fit for you. So we can repeat over and over until we're blue in the face to do this. But if I wanted to do, it was on similar to flossing, which remains one of my tasks that I hope to do every year consistently. But meditating was one of those things that I always wanted to do because I was like, oh, it's so good for you and you're supposed to do it. It took years of trial and error. And I'm not meditating right now as consistently as I'd like to, but not just, I don't know why I'm having a block maybe, but I know where to go. I know what I like. I know what I want to do. And so, but that took years to find. It took many, many apps, even free apps. Like my company was paying for certain apps. So it wasn't even a financial thing preventing me. It was just, I would try it. I didn't like it. I didn't like I would try beginner courses. The beginner courses are so boring. I needed people telling me it worked actually when I joined our circle, not our circle, but a circle. And somebody said, do this meditation.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay, cool. And so, but what was nice about that is had I not liked that meditation, I could have come back to her and said, I didn't like it. Give me a different one. So, these things work, but only if they're a good fit for you.
Yeah, and I want to circle back to something you just said, and that is like maybe it doesn't work for you forever, right? Like
Yep.
maybe you meditate for a few months and then you're like, this isn't working for me anymore. And so you start doing tapping, or you
Yep.
get out in nature, or you find a therapist, or you do any of these mindfulness practices, you start journaling, you join a women's circle, you do whatever it is you do. Um, and they may work for a while and then they may stop working and then they may start working again, and it's okay to be flexible, and there's no requirement that like you meditate every day for 20 minutes for the rest of your life. Like
Right.
that's not realistic, to be honest, because tastes change over time. Like what interests
Yep.
you changes over time. Your environment will change, and all of that is totally fine. You can, you can start doing yoga, and maybe you decide, well, actually Pilates would really be more for me right now. Whatever it is. In all of that, I
Well,
think
and
is
I think I
okay.
said a couple weeks ago on the episode, like, I don't like hot yoga. I don't
Yeah.
like saunas. And now I'm loving, I can't wait until this afternoon to go do yoga in a sauna. What?
Right.
Things change.
Things changed, and that's why we try new things, right? Like,
Yep. And
and
we
I
tried old things again.
yes. Yeah, exactly. We do need to wrap up. I just want to say I've said it so many times in this episode, but really, like, if you are struggling with this stuff, please seek some professional help. It is so hard, and you do not have to do it alone. Um, I think a lot of us hide in the shadows, and not don't want to admit or acknowledge that these things are happening in our lives, that maybe we are struggling. I mean, triggering has become this like weird politicized word. You just like change the word if you need to, because none of that matters. What matters is your happiness, your health, your well-being. And if you are struggling with the way you react to certain environments, certain situations, and you don't know why, find somebody to talk to about it, whether it's a pastor, a therapist, a psychiatrist, your doctor, whoever.
Yep.
Because you don't have to do it alone. You don't have to suffer. It's not a requirement. Uh,
This is also, I forgot to say this way back when. It's December 4th. Lots of big holidays coming up.
mm,
Lots of big events. You are going to be bringing both literal baggage places and figurative baggage places. And maybe you're not carrying emotional triggers with you in the uh, official sense of the word, but you're going to be bringing stuff with you. And the more emotional awareness that you can bring to a situation, the better. And hopefully the more you'll enjoy the next month. Hopefully the more you can enjoy your experiences with your family and friends, that you can say, oh, that person isn't intentionally attacking me, or maybe they are, but like they're always like that. I don't care. It's not about me, it's about them.
right.
And I have to be here because we've decided as a family we have to be here, but I'm going to move on and go somewhere else in this room. Like
Right.
whatever it is, I hope that the conversations that we've had since September 18th have helped allow you to enjoy the holiday season a little bit, because it's helped you be more self-aware and know that, the stuff that you've been carrying with you has helped you make this amazing person that you are, and that you're bringing that to these events and these parties, and you don't have to react to people, and you're in charge of how you react, and how you know you deal with things, and you're aware of the situations, like you're aware of the baggage that you need and what's in your backpack, and hopefully that means that you'll have a more enjoyable holiday season.
Yeah. Yes. Um, a little bit of homework if you have the time for it. I feel like this is a tough time of year for these kinds of things, but it's, as we've said throughout this whole episode, it's really helpful to start being more self-aware and like building your emotional intelligence. So we're going to encourage you to bust out the journal, and or like a little notebook or your notes app in your phone, whatever it is. And just throughout this week ahead, write down instances where you think maybe something is causing you to react in a way that is disproportionate to the event that you're experiencing in the moment. Just write them all down. And then at the end of the week, maybe Sunday, depending on when you're listening to this, go ahead and read through the list and reflect back on what mindfulness technique would help you deal with all that. Would it be like a 30-second deep breathing? Would it be a meditation? Would it be just walking away, right? Like going outside and taking a deep breath away from whatever the environment is that's causing the response. And put those next to the triggers. And remind yourself throughout the following week, like, okay, I can make a different decision. I can choose to meditate. I can choose to phone a friend. I can look at Instagram reels because that will help me sort of like decompress a little bit, whatever it is. If you want more help with this, if it's something that you're not sure how to deal with or address, feel free to join our weekly women's circle. We have, it's a great place, I think, a safe place for people to be honest about what's happening in their lives. So you can find us on social media at Go Boldly Together. You can find us online at goboldlyinitiative.com. We would love to have you join us. It's a lot of fun. So that's it for this week. We'll be back next week with a little more about the undoing, unbecoming of it all. And until then, everyone, have a wonderful, wonderful week.
Thanks so much for listening to We Go Boldly podcast. We know you're busy and we love spending time with you.
If you enjoyed this week's episode, let us know. Head to Apple Podcasts right now to rate and review our show. While you're there, be sure to click that subscribe button.
Want more us time? Follow us on all the socials at Go Boldly Together.
Want even more us time? As in all the coaching pizzazz. Find us at goboldlyinitiative.com for all the info.
We will be back with more excitement, research, and deep thoughts next week.
Until then, keep on being the bold, brave, amazing people we know you already are.
The Power Moms Network, empowering moms to lift the world.